Hello and welcome to another episode of Foundation with Steve Teed. As always, I'm your host and servant, Steve Teed, always helping you to build and stand firm on the solid foundation of Jesus Christ. That's what I try to do here, and we do that by looking at various things that are going on around our world, but typically I like to stay within the church because it's in the church that we have to stand firm, that we should be standing firm and not moving away from the gospel. Let's cut back to music and I'll tell you what we're going to be looking at today. In today's episode, I'm calling this one, Don't Be a Player. Don't be a player. Now, I'm not referring to the term player as in a guy who's pursuing lots of women. I'm using it actually in the correct term. And we're going to be unpacking that. And it means don't be a pretend person. Don't just play a part. Be authentic and stick to what is there. And in this episode, we're going to be looking at, all throughout, it's going to have that theme. We're going to be looking at things where people seem to be more pretending to be a Christian, pretending to be a teacher, pretending to hold true to the things of Christ. And we're going to do that through, as always, a couple of articles. And one we're going to be looking at, we're going to go back and we're going to visit the Church of England. I've seen to have been covering them a few times throughout this season here, just because they've been dealing with some things, in one topic in particular. And we're going to go see something that they're implementing. And not everybody's for it, but they're going to implement it anyway. In fact, it was almost 50-50. But yet it still passed. Then we're going to go look at what happens when the church stands firm. What if they don't move from the gospel? What if they don't be a player? And we'll see what happens. And then we're going to have, as always, we're going to have our educational portion with our word of the week. We got to expand our minds a little bit. You got to learn something. We all got to continue to grow in it. That's important. And one of the things about the true faith of Christian faith, it's never been supposed to be about checking your brain at the door. It's about growing in the understanding of Jesus Christ. In fact, one of the things that we're told, you can see it in 2 Peter, add to this knowledge. That is the knowledge of Jesus, knowledge of the truth. That is what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to grow in knowledge and grow in the faith. And I've said this, one of the things that sets Christianity apart from everything else is that, unlike a lot of the others, Christianity is actually rooted in history. It is. It's rooted in very much history. The people that we read about in the scriptures were real people facing real events and so forth. That Christianity's rooted in history, and you can't just separate it. We've got to learn it. We've got to grow it. We've got to understand it. And so grow in the knowledge. And then, as always, we're going to hit the ever-popular Apostasy of the Week. And this one is definitely fascinating. It's one that's going to grab you, I think. I think it'll grab you. In fact, even in the video that we're going to show you, you're going to see people being touched emotionally by what is going on and what is being said. We're going to unpack that and see where the problem is and see why in that too we're going to say that is a player. So that's where we're going to go. That's where we're headed. Come on, strap in, enjoy the ride. Let's go. So we're going to jump in. Let's hit the music for our first story. I told you we're going to go hit up the Church of England, and here we go. The Church of England votes to proceed with trial blessing services for same-sex couples. That's right. You're reading that right. You're hearing me right. The Church of England, they've been struggling over the last little while. That's no surprise there. But they were having this debate about what do they do with same-sex couples? What do they do? So they're going to have a trial basis. Isn't that almost everything has a trial basis nowadays? And the purpose of a trial basis is not to see really if it works. A trial basis is often used now to implement something to get you to grab onto it. That's really what they do. And you can get this anyways from like Prime Video, where it's like, hey, you can get 1 month free. And the point of that is once you've had it for the month, they're hoping you'll keep it, kind of thing. And that's what they'll do. And every place is doing that. And it's how something really gets snuck in. And this happens. I remember even in one church where they for various reasons at the time. They were out. They didn't have an actual pastor. And a gentleman comes along and says, yeah, sure. It's like he'll fill in for them for a bit. And then the big person of the church, if you don't know what that is, in some churches, your power people, I typically say, are the people who give the most money. A lot of times they think they have the most say. And they wanted the person. They liked the person. They wanted to keep them, but was well aware that they weren't the most popular person. They, in other words, the speaker wasn't the one that they really desired. We said, we'll do it on a trial basis. We'll do it for a year. We'll try it for a year. Knowing that the goal was to get them moved in and put them in on a permanent basis. Because once you've got it, then you become accustomed to it. And essentially, that's what happened. Now, mind you, even in the end, that person didn't stay long. I think they only stayed 3 years or something like that, 2-3 years. But it's often how it is. When a trial basis comes in, and this is what they're doing, a trial basis comes in, it's to get you to put it in and get them to forget that it's there or become accustomed to it. And we'll see that a little bit here. Let's look here a little bit at the article. The Church of England has decided to proceed with trial blessing services for same-sex couples. The decision made during the General Synod marks a significant shift in the denomination's stance on same-sex relationships. The Bishop of Oxford proposed the amendment for these trial services, which narrowly passed in the House of Laity by 1 vote. The UK-based group, the Christian Institute, noted, adding that the House of Bishops supported the motion 23-10 with 4 absentees. The House of Clergy also voted in favor 100-93 with 1 absentation. The House of Laity also voted in favor, but by 104-101 with no absentees. Now, you got to look at that. This is what I said. This was about 50-50 split, except for the House of Bishops. The House of Bishops were like, hey, overwhelmingly for it. By 2-1. A little over 2-1. And then you got 4 absentees. Now, in voting procedures, there's reasons for absentees. Some could just be they weren't able to make it. Others, on the other hand, they abstained for one reason or another. I remember one of the processes that to become an ordained minister in where I did. You had to go before a board, and you have to answer questions on the faith. You have to defend the faith, and that kind of thing. And then they take a vote. And in mine, I remember that it had something like 6 or 7 abstentions, where they just abstained from voting. And it had to do with the fact, like, one was my mentor, so he had to abstain from voting. Another person that was on that board knew me from when I was a child, so didn't think that they could actually vote unbiasedly, because they knew everything. They knew the family and all that. And that happened quite a bit. So they abstained. But here, I can't tell you why they would abstain, but it's just the way it is. But if you look, when it came down, so you start at the bottom, the House of Laity, they were 104-100. That's almost 50-50. The House of Clergy, 100-93. And then it's when it came down to the House of Laity, it was just 1 vote. But it's still enough, apparently. And it's fascinating, because a lot of churches that I'm in, when they take a vote, it usually has to be 75, 80, even sometimes up to 85% of the vote. So 50-50 is not enough. But when something passes that close, and it tells you that they changed it. Now notice that the Bishop of Oxford proposed the amendment to these trial services. Why do you do such an amendment? Because it means you want to get it through, and when you get in, and you know you're not going to be able to make it pass as is. So you amend it just enough so you get what you want, and in this case, it's like, we'll just make it a trial basis. So originally the House of Bishops proposed that these services be formally authorized under a 2-year process, requiring a 2/3 majority in each of the 3 houses. However, the approval allows for the use of prayers of blessing in existing services as early as December while the bishops discuss implementation. So that's probably what the actual amendment was. that you can go ahead and do it until the official decision comes in. But what this actually is this saying, hey, I'm going to try to sneak it in the back door. And what are they really debating? They're really debating the idea, should same-sex unions be acceptable? Should they receive the blessing? This is one of the things that you overlook. Because you say, well, the church should stay neutral on these things. It's a civil matter. It's not. It is not. When people are engaging in sin, they often want the approval of that sin. And what I mean by that, they know deep down inside that it is sinful. And with that, they turn around and they want the approval. As much as our society likes to try to say that there is no God, as much as our society tries to say that, hey, we reject the things of God, as much as it tries to do that, deep down inside, humanity cannot get away from the fact that we were created in the image of God. Ecclesiastes kind of makes this point that God has put eternity into our hearts. In other words, we know there's something more. And this is why even most atheists, when they're faced with the loss of somebody very close to them, they feel that loss so greatly and they start to ask questions. Because we know deep down inside that there's something more. We really do. And as much as we fight it. And in this case, since the church, and I'm using the church there as a whole, represents Christ, they need the approval of the church, because if they get the approval of the church, for them, it's the exact same as if they have the approval of God. That's what it is. And so when a church starts to implement these things, then the society starts to like it. Now, as I said, this is not unanimous by any cases in the Church of England. The Reverend John Dunnett, National Director of the Church of England Evangelical Council, expressed disappointment with the decision, stating it departs from a biblical understanding of sex and marriage. Yeah, it does. It absolutely does. The CEC plans to announce provisions for Orthodox evangelicals and aims to ensure their continued presence in the denomination. Now, why is that? Because they're afraid of what's happening to the United Methodists will happen here. And that's where they split. Look, there are times where unity is not possible. The Christian was never called to be unified in all cases. It's not. The Bible even says in Romans, says, if possible, live at peace with all men. Sometimes it's not going to be possible, and it's not going to be possible where within an organization that's supposed to bear the name of Christ decides to deviate completely from the teachings of Jesus. See, in this, I would say that that half of the Church of England, or particularly more than that of the House of Bishops of the Church of England, they are playing at being followers of Christ. It's really what it is. They're playing at it. And you have people like Reverend John Dunnett here, who's in it, who understands that they're getting away from the biblical understanding. So the Anglican Network in Europe, the Anglican Convocation in Europe, and the Anglican Mission in England had previously urged the House of Bishops to adhere to biblical teachings on sexual conduct. They described the decision as offensive to God and a distortion of his message. And that's true, it is. It is. The problem is, and here's where I think churches can get off and Christians can get so lost. The mission of the church and the mission of the Christian, the primary mission, is not to serve the people around them. The primary mission of the church is not to serve the community. The primary mission of the church is to serve Christ. That's what it's called to do. To put him first in all things. But oftentimes when people are talking about it, it's like, well, you can't do it. It's unloving. You're judging them. How dare you cast judgment on these people? And here, I'm going to go back to the article because the article sums this up quite nicely. The rector of Buckingham, the Reverend William Pearson Gee, emphasized the importance of adhering to the teachings of Jesus and the Apostolic Church. Now, there's nothing wrong with what he said there. As long as the teachings of the Apostolic Church, in this case, are secondary and subservient to the teachings of Jesus. It's what I said is one of the major problems of the Catholic Church. In its inception, I'm not talking about the Pope here, I'm talking about the actual Catholic Church. If I remove the Pope from it, they would say that there's two pillars of the church, the scriptures and tradition. But oftentimes what happens is tradition can take precedence over the scriptures. That's what can happen. And so even here, when you say the adhering to the teachings of Jesus and the Apostolic Church, as long as the Apostolic Church adheres to the teachings of Jesus. But it continues here. It's like, to say that a practice is sinful is not opposed to a Savior who came to save us from sin. It's all in our discovery that we are sinful and that it is pastoral to be told how and to be called to change. I agree. Too many churches nowadays and too many messages that are being proclaimed from the church are not about how to live holy. They're not about how to live a sanctified life. They're no longer about calling things sin anymore. They're more about, here's how you can live your best life now in sort of aspect without understanding who Jesus is. When we start to remove the understanding of sin, when we start to remove the teaching of sin, we remove the need of a Savior. And this is what is happening. I think this is why too many times our churches no longer really proclaim the coming of a Savior. And it's interesting because we're coming into Christmas. And when you look at the message of the angel Gabriel to Joseph, in this aspect, he comes to it in the Gospel according to Matthew, as Matthew wrote it. He's like, you shall call him Jesus because he will save his people from their sin. But the question is, well, what does that mean? The heart of the gospel is the fact that God saves us from our sin. When we remove sin from the equation and we start saying these aren't sin anymore, then we're running into the problem where we're gutting the extent of the grace of God. We're gutting the love of God. In every aspect, when you look at it, it says God demonstrated his own love for us in this. How? That while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. That's the point. It goes 1 Corinthians 15. That Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures. It's there. When we remove this concept of sin by saying, oh, it's not sin, and by allowing to... They will try to argue, well, we're not marrying them. No, by putting a blessing on it, you're saying their lifestyle is fine. You're gutting the gospel. That's what is happening. And to tell somebody and to teach them that something is sinful is not wrong. In fact, it is very, very loving to do. But the danger of this is you can't just teach sin. You must always teach it in connection to Jesus and the price that he paid for it. You cannot proclaim the law without grace as well. Law means don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. You got to do this, you got to do this. No, and you need grace that says we couldn't keep it. And Jesus paid the price for us. That's what we have to understand. Charlie Skin, the rector of All Souls in London, pointed out the contradiction between the Church of England's doctrine on marriage and the proposed pastoral step. The Reverend Niall Barber from Derby and Reverend Ian Paul from Southwell and Nottingham raised concerns about the perceived abandonment of doctrine and the need for integrity and transparency. And he says this, the watching world sees that the Church of England is dumping its doctrine, even though we assert that legally we are not. But they know that we are not doing nothing. They see that we are changing doctrine. And see, that's the trick. This is the back door that is coming in. By saying we're doing a trial thing. We're not dumping it. We're not going to marry them. We'll do this trial prayer of blessing. And he's caught he's caught the sight of it. This is the same. When the church eases up on doctrine and on sin, those on the outside look in and say, they're changing their stances. They really are. They're coming around. That's what's happening. Anna DeCastro from Sheffield called for consistency between the confessed and lived doctrines. In other words, what she's calling for is don't be a player. If this is the confessed doctrines, live it. If you proclaim that marriage between a man and a woman, you cannot turn around and then bless those who want something else. If they're willing to bless same-sex marriages, why won't they just open the door then to bless open marriages or to bless polygamous marriages? What's the problem with it? Why not just keep going? If you're going to throw it out, then you might as well go the whole way. And you wonder, what is going on here? Well, it's simple what is going on. The scriptures talk about this. Judgment will start with the house of God. And what you're seeing here is the wheat and the tares, they're growing. And Jesus told the parable. He says, a farmer went out to plant his field, and an enemy came in the night and sowed tares amongst it. And Jesus said they're going to grow together until the time of the judgment. It's like, that's what's going to happen. And the wheat will be gathered and taken to the barn, and the tares will be thrown into the furnace. But how do you know the difference between the wheat and the tares? It's not until they bear fruit that it really shows the difference. And what you're seeing is that within the churches, that you got the follower of Christ and the fake and the players in the church together, the fake followers, the players together, and they're growing up. And now what you're seeing is the fruit bearing forth, and you're beginning to see which ones are the true followers and which ones have been playing pretend. And I maybe seem like I'm picking on the Church of England here, but it's not just them. It's happening everywhere within the churches. And I've seen it happen. Where people they leave because they don't like what's being taught when it's scriptural. They'll get rid of the teachers they don't like who are holding to the scripture. And they'll bring in people who tell them what they want to hear. And a lot of churches may not be flat out teaching false doctrine, but they're also not really teaching the gospel either. They're just being life lessons, saying, hey, here's how you can succeed in this. Here's how you can have a better this. You're going to have a better that. Rather than proclaiming Christ. All right, let's get to our next story of our week today, of our episode. All right, our next story. I kind of teeter which story I was going to go to. But I'm going to go to this one. Covered up. Anti-Christian hate crimes, including murder, make collective rise in Europe, the report says. All right, let's unpack this a little bit. Now, this shouldn't be a surprise. Think about something in the Church of England, the story we just covered. Half the church is going one way, half the church is going the other. This happened to the United Methodists. Part are going one way, part are going the other. And one part will be celebrated by the world, and the other one will be called bigotry. They'll be called hateful. They'll be called unloving. That's ultimately what's going to happen. And the more people hear this, the more people recognize this, the more it sinks into every aspect. But let's look at the report. Anti-Christian vandalism, threats, physical assaults, and even murder showed a collective increase in 2022, the Observatory of Intolerance and Discrimination Against Christians in Europe has revealed in a report, in a new report. The observatory, which is based in Vienna, Austria, and has been tracking hate crimes against Christians in Europe over the last decade, highlighted in their 2022-2023 annual report a total of 749 documented hate crimes against Christians in 30 European countries in 2022. The crimes include physical assaults and 3 murders. From 2000 from 2021 to 2022, the observatory documented 519 hate crimes against Christians in Europe. There is a reasonable probability for higher dark numbers due to limited reporting on anti-Christian hate crimes, the chilling effect among victims, and the lack of media coverage. That's one of the things that I don't think people understand, is that our culture has almost like a blackening out, a darkening out of reports against Christian hate crime, reports against Christians. Where you find places, you have to dig quite a bit, even in North America, to find the stories of events where like churches are being burnt down and things like that. You even take a look at the shooting at the Christian school in the States not too long ago. How fast that disappeared from the media. How fast it disappears from the media, and you compare that to the Pulse nightclub shooting. You just compare how long they sit in there. Why? Because one was a hate crime against Christians and one was classified as a hate crime against homosexuals. Both are bad. Both are absolutely horrible. But they don't get reported. It's what's happened. It says an increasing trend in hate crimes against Christians perpetrated by radicalized members of ideological, political, or religious groups that follow an anti-Christian narrative was also highlighted as Christians faced infringement on their religious freedoms through new laws regulating speech in public. See, that's part of what people don't even understand. That the governments are passing laws which are saying, Christians, you can't do this. Things that people have been allowed to do, such as to stand in certain places, to pray with certain people. This is why it's fascinating to watch when you see a lady in London get arrested outside a closed abortion clinic for praying silently. And they didn't even know what she was doing, except they came up and asked her and then arrested her for it. That's a problem. And as I said, and I had to point this out, even with my own family, I said that our Canadian government has passed a law that basically says that that the Bible's a myth. And they asked, well, where's that in the law? And I showed them, I went back and I read the law to them. And that was with the so-called conversion therapy bill, where it says that the myth that they're born male, that they were created male and female. It says that in the preamble of the law. And that's in the law. This is what's happening. It's happening and the regulation of speech, what you can say, what you can't say. You take a look at even in social medias, which things have been hidden, which things are kept down, which things are denied. This is what's happening. It says the right to freedom of speech continues to be a highly debated issue as new laws are seeking to regulate speech in public sphere and some even in the private sphere. New buffer zones around abortion clinics are one form of state regulation that has led to the criminalization of Christians for praying silently on the street. Obviously, it's referring to the same one that I did. It said the religious freedom of Christians has also been affected through other legal developments, such as vaguely formulated or overreaching laws that would criminalize parents, pastors, and teachers if they express dissenting opinions regarding LGBTIQ-related discussions or discourage their children from undergoing hormone therapies because of their religious convictions. Do you ever wonder what's going on in places where, because of, like, in a place like Canada where the conversion therapy bills come in, that means if a child is suffering from gender dysphoria and you take them to a psychologist or a psychiatrist, the psychiatrist by law has to affirm the gender dysphoria. And what I don't mean affirm the diagnosis of the child having gender dysphoria, but rather has to affirm the new gender or they're in violation of the law. That's the problem. That's the way it is. That's what's happening. Therefore, if a Christian psychiatrist has a child come in who's suffering from this, or a person comes in who's suffering from gender dysphoria, they have to say, no, you really are whatever sex you feel you are. They have to, or they're breaking the law. This is the problem. Where we have a problem where in our school systems where because of the way things are, you are allowed to push people and decorate your room with all the LGBTQ paraphernalia you want. But you can't have even the slightest inclination of a religious belief. There's the problem. There's another article that was talking about that a 200-year-old church, its bell has rung for the last time because somebody put in a noise complaint. That's what it is. It says the agenda against Christians in Europe has also seen an effort to remove conscious clauses from legislation in the medical space that put Christians who refuse to participate in controversial practices for reasons or religious conscience in vulnerable positions. And this is the main attitude of people too. There should be no longer religious exemptions for things. In other words, if a doctor is not willing to perform an abortion, well, then they shouldn't be a doctor. If a doctor is not willing to perform and give cross-sex hormones, then they shouldn't be a doctor. That's one of the things that has happened. This is what's happening. Now, this is talking particularly about Europe, but it's happening all across. It says the war in Ukraine, apart from being a terrible humanitarian crisis, has also affected religious freedom in the region. Many of these incidents are highly political and ethnic related, but they have led to different forms of discrimination towards Christians, the report said. Russian authorities and troops have repeatedly violated the religious freedoms of Christians by closing churches and kidnapping or arresting pastors. Orthodox Christians have also faced discrimination in many European countries because of the war. Similarly, Ukraine has been cracking down on the Ukrainian Orthodox Church and arresting priests because of its historic ties to Russia. In light of the growing number of attacks against Christians in Europe, the observatory urged government officials to improve communication with civil society organizations, religious groups when drafting legislation that could limit their freedom of religion for Christians directly or indirectly. I guarantee you they're not going to. They're not going to. They're going to continue on. Why? Because whether you like it or not, this is where people don't understand the totality of something like critical race theory as it's affecting decision-making, affecting society. In critical race theory, you have the oppression train and the oppressed train and oppression train. What do I mean? Just think of it as a train. Okay, the closer you are up towards the locomotive, the more oppression you get, or oppressive points, victim points, if you want. That'd be the word. The more victim points you get, and in this aspect, it's always oppressed and oppressor. That's what it always is. And so the most oppressed by that aspect are things such as LGBTQ, people of color, non-Christians, that kind of aspect. That's really what it is. And so in this aspect, you go, okay, who's the oppressor? And because society is bought, the governments have bought into critical race theory, the classification of the most oppressive group are Christians. Are Bible-believing, Jesus-following Christians. Why? Because they would say that homosexuality is wrong. That's oppressive. That's an oppressive aspect. And because for some reason they've now linked Christianity with whiteness, it's become even more oppressive, despite the fact that Christianity knows no race. In fact, you look in Revelation, it says, when he looked and he saw a great multitude beyond measure from every tribe, tongue, nation, and peoples. Christianity knows no race. It's not a white man's religion. It's not a black man's religion. It's not an Asian man's religion. It's not even a Jewish religion. It is a faith that follows Christ, that breaks all the barriers. Yet it is seen in such an aspect that it is oppressive. So therefore, laws will continue to be passed that will regulate and limit those who follow Christ. Because when we proclaim that all life is sacred and created in the image of God, well, then all of a sudden Christianity is seen as patriarchal. And it's an oppressive patriarchal system that's trying to keep women down. And this shouldn't be a surprise if this is happening. The Apostle Paul, writing to Timothy, says this: all who seek to live godly in Christ Jesus will suffer persecution. Jesus himself told his disciples, when the world hates you, it wasn't if, it might happen. It's like, when it hates you, remember it hated me first. Now, people try to argue, oh, no, they don't hate Jesus. No, they recreate Jesus to one that is more palatable to them. That's ultimately what they do. And that's what, and then therefore they like it. See, the true Christian can't be a player. The true Christian who's following Christ is going to suffer these persecutions. And it will happen in some aspects, it'll happen in others. And as time's going on, as our culture continues to get away from Christ and continues to buy into the lies of the enemy, those who stand on the truth of Jesus Christ, even proclaiming it in love, will be seen as hateful. And eventually the day will come where they will say handing them over to the authorities will be classified as a good thing. And you can see that already happening. When our laws start to say that parents, in certain places, parents, if you're not affirming of your child becoming transgender, well, then you're going to lose your right as a parent. That's what you're going to do. That's how it is. And it's not just anti-Christian hate. It's anti-Christ hate. And that's what's developing in our world. But don't be a player. Stand firm on the gospel of Jesus Christ. All right, let's move on to our educational aspect of our episode for the week. I want us to grow a little bit. I want us to think a little bit. So for that, we're going to our segment, What Does That Mean? And for that, we got to pull it up. And here we go. What does that mean?
The train goes backwards through the tunnel.
What does that mean? I don't get it. What does that mean?
All right. The train goes backwards through the tunnel. I don't get it. What does that mean? What does it mean? What does it mean? What is our word of the week? Our word of the week. Since we've been talking about players, if you haven't guessed it yet, because I like to try to stay on the whole theme here, being a player, we're going to be looking at this word right here. The word is hypocrite. Hypocrite. A nice, good word. A word that is often used today. And people say, oh, they're a hypocrite. They're a hypocrite. And I don't think people understand what the actual word is. They almost always put it in connection to say that a hypocrite, Christians are hypocrites. When you hear people say, I'm not going to go to church because there's too many hypocrites in the church. And what do they mean? Let's unpack this word hypocrite. Where does it actually come from? Well, going on with the theme of our today's episode, a hypocrite essentially is a player. The original word, hypocrite, comes from someone who is an actor. And if you were to look up the definition of hypocrite, it means one who plays a part. That's ultimately what it is. And Jesus used the word quite a bit. He says, woe to you, you scribes and you Pharisees, you hypocrites. But what was the hypocritical part? Why did Jesus call them hypocrites? Why was he so strongly against them? It's because they perceived and tried to proclaim and play the part that they were a righteous, wholesome, upstanding person. That they were holy. That's what it was about. That's what he was talking about. That they were precise. Like, look, you tithe even down to your spices. You're giving of your mint, your dill, your cumin. You're doing these things. But you're neglecting the widows and the orphans. In fact, you even go so far, you devour the widows' houses. They were forgetting what the purpose of the tithe actually was. The purpose of the tithe dates back to the Old Testament and the idea of inheritance. Understanding inheriting the land is a central theme even in the Gospels and through all the Scriptures. That's why there's a new heaven and a new earth, and like a new inheritance kind of aspect where we've lost Eden. And when they came into the Promised Land, one group, one tribe wasn't given any territory, and that was the Levites. And so, how are the Levites supposed to partake in life? How are they supposed to have their needs met if they didn't actually have land or their own inheritance? Well, that's what the tithe was for. The tithing was for the Levites so that they could live. It was to provide for. And the society themselves were supposed to also look after the orphans and the widows. That's why he's saying they're hypocrites. It's good to give the tithe, but it is bad because they're overlooking what they're actually supposed to be doing. They were trying to say, look how righteous I am, look how holy I am. They were playing the part of the holy person. See, the hypocrite in the church is not the person who will stand and say, this is sin. And yet they struggle in sin. That's not the hypocrite. The hypocrite is the person who thinks it's completely and utterly fine for them to do something and to keep sin, but condemning somebody else in sin. That's what it is. I was reading an article recently that was just like crazy things that moms have posted in moms groups. And this one in particular, she was talking about the fact that it's like they were going on a trip, a mom's trip. She was taking her 7-month-old child, and yet she was complaining that another mom was going to have to bring her 2-year-old. And saying that it's bad. It's like, how dare they bring it? They're going to ruin our mom's only time out. Not realizing, overlooking the fact that they're taking it, it's their own child. That is a hypocrite. In fact, I would argue that half of the Church of England, which voted to bless same-sex marriage, is a hypocrite. A church that teaches, that claims to be Christian yet denies the fundamental aspects of the faith are hypocrites. A church that proclaims to be a follower of Christ yet says that Jesus is not the only way. Hypocrite. That's the hypocrite. Jesus didn't have to call the tax collectors, the prostitutes, and the sinners hypocrites because they weren't hypocrites. Because they knew what they were doing wrong. They knew that they needed a Savior, and they came to Jesus. That's what it is. The average person in a church, are there hypocrites in the church? Sure. There are people who attend church, think that they're the holy one, they're the righteous one, that they're completely good and pure, and condemn others while they themselves are guilty of it. That's the hypocrite. The hypocrite is not somebody who is striving to follow Christ, yet stumbles here and there, and by the grace of God they continue on. That's not a hypocrite. That's a person seeking to follow Christ, and yet still struggling at times, like we all do. The hypocrite is the pastor on the stage complaining that people aren't giving him enough money, while at the same time he's living in luxury. The hypocrite is the person who's saying you have to cut back your carbon footprint, while at the same time that they're flying around on private jets all the time. That is hypocrisy. That's the hypocrite. If we're going to be a follower of Christ, may we not play the part, may we be the part. Let's become what we're supposed to be, the follower of Christ, and not be the hypocrite. All right, let's get to the part of our segment of the show that I think most people really enjoy, or really loathe, I'm not sure which, our Apostasy of the Week. And for that, I need this.
Time is near.
The time is near. What is that a reference to? That is the time is near for the return of Jesus Christ. And there are many signs of the return of Christ. Love growing cold. That is definitely one. People seeking their own means. Definitely one. People doing what is an abomination against God. Not only they themselves doing it, but celebrating when those things are done. That is absolutely true. But one of the other things is the great apostasy. The great falling away. When the churches, those who claim to be followers of Christ, have fallen away and they continue on. We already saw that in this first article, and I've talked about it all throughout this episode, that the Church of England falling into apostasy, trying to play a part, but they fall into apostasy. Well, today, I got one for you. Now, this one is going to be a little interesting for you. I'm not going to give you a whole lot about it, but I'm going to give you part of it about it at least. That is not who we're talking about. That's just a member in the audience. Again, I got to give a shout out to Apostasy. I'm a one-man show, so I don't have time to go through it. I got a whole lot of other things to do in my schedule as well. So to fit it in, I search through them. I let them, they're one of the groups that I use to search for me sometimes. I give a shout out to them. That's why I always leave their water stamp on there. Give them credit. But this one, it's coming from a conference. And the speaker here who's going to get the award this week is Sarah Jake Roberts. And if you look at that and you go, wait, Sarah Jakes Roberts. Yes, the connection is there to good old T.D. Jakes. Prosperity preacher, false teacher, Trinity denying man. He's a false teacher. This is his daughter. Now, it's not. I'm not going to be coming against this because she's speaking. This is one of those ones I'm not against her because of speaking. Normally, it's because a lot of times it's females within the church. This is a woman's conference. This is Women Evolved Conference. That's what it's called, the Women Evolved Conference. And that means it's an audience of women. No problem. You got a woman teaching women. The problem is what's being said. And in truth, I'm going to use this. She's playing at being a biblical exegete. She's playing at being a Christian teacher. And we're going to unpack. And what you're going to see here is how not to teach the scriptures. Not to proclaim it. Let's go. I'm going to start a little bit, and then I'm going to cut it because then I got to dig into the scriptures for you to understand exactly what she is referring to. So let's jump right in.
I'm in birthing position. I'm trying to get ready for something to come out of me.
Okay, that's right there. I'm going to pause it. That's going to tell you kind of a hint of where this is going to go. So I'm getting in the birthing position. I'm getting ready in that position. Something's going to come out of me. That's right. That's, if you're already going, okay, what on earth? But you can't really make a judgment based on 5 seconds. Let's go. Like I said, that's just to whet your appetite a little bit. That's what's the Connor term? A bouge mouche, something like that. Just whet your appetite. And some people are probably bailing out right now, but let's dig in.
This wild woman trying to find her wilderness, gets pregnant. She's not in her wilderness, but she's fighting to give birth. She's fighting because she recognizes that there is a dragon waiting to devour everything that comes out of her. Maybe it's not a dragon for you, maybe.
Okay, gonna stop there. If you're going, okay, what on earth is she talking about? A woman trying to find her wilderness? Trying to give birth, she's not in her wilderness yet. And a dragon there. It's like, okay, let's look at what she's actually referring to. She's referring to this passage, Revelation chapter 12. I think that's fitting, given we're talking about apostasy here and a completely horrible teaching. But Revelation chapter 12, let's read this, verses 1 to 6. So it's the Apostle John. He's being showed what is being written. It showed that being there, but let's see what it says. Now, a great sign appeared in heaven. A woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars. Then being with child, she cried out in labor and in pain to give birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great fiery red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 diadems on his heads. His tail drew a third of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth, to devour her child as soon as it was born. She bore a male child who was to rule all nations, and with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up to God and his throne. Then the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. Now, what is that talking about? Let's get a little lesson here in Revelation. Revelation is about 3 things. Things that were, things that are, and things that will be. Okay? That's kind of what it is. And this is where this kind of encapsulates all 3 of those. And Revelation is written in apocalyptic literature, which means it uses a lot of imagery. Sometimes it's literal. Other times it's very imagery. And this is one of those imagery things. This is imagery. It is. And so he looks, so it's kind of like when he looks, this section of Revelation 12 is kind of like an interlude. He's getting a big picture here for a second. And this is about something that has happened and will happen at the same time. And so you see, you got a woman who is clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, and upon her head a garland of 12 stars. And almost everybody agrees that this is a reference, in essence, to both Israel and Mary. The Virgin Mary in this case. I'm using that not because she was a perpetual version like Catholicism teaches, but when she was the vessel that God used to bring about this, to come in human form, take on and be the Savior. So that's kind of the image. So it's there. It's like it's introducing who the woman is. Okay? And then he looks, and it says, a great fiery dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 diadems. This is the dragon. Who's the dragon? Well, Lucifer, Satan, the accuser of the brethren. His tail drew a third of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. In this aspect, it's an imagery of when Satan fell and rebelled against God. This is where they have that he took a third of the angels followed him. It says, and then it says, and the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth to devour her child. This would be the use of Herod. That's what it was. If you remember, and you go and you read the book of Matthew, it talks about when the Magi came and they told Herod that, yeah, we're looking for the one who's to come. It's like, and Herod asked, where is he born? Searched, like, oh, Bethlehem in Judea is okay. And then when Herod realized that the Magi tricked him, that they went a home different way, you can remember Herod's goal was to kill Jesus. History knows him as Herod the Great, but he was paranoid about his throne. He would get rid of anybody that he thought was a threat to his throne. And so in this case, was there a literal dragon sitting there waiting to swallow the Messiah child, the child who's born but the son who's given? Is it? No, there wasn't. But it's the imagery. In that aspect, it's talking about what has already taken place, the coming of the Messiah. And how do I know it's the Messiah? Well, because look what it says. A male child who was to rule all nations with an iron rod. That's what it was. And so it's a reference to Jesus. And then the time would come where the child would be caught up to God and his throne. Be caught up to the throne. That is the ascension of Jesus. And he will come. But the dragon isn't done. The dragon still has a hatred for Israel. And so he seeks to destroy Israel. And God is going to take Israel, this will take place, the remnant, and go to a place that is prepared by God, that they would be feed her and to be looked after for 1,260 days. So this whole passage is not about you, it's not about me, it's not about women, it's not even about giving birth. It's about the history, and it's about Jesus, and it's about what God is doing, has done, and will do. That's what it is. Now let's get a lesson on how not to teach this passage. Let's go back and listen once more to Sarah Jakes Roberts. Ready? I'm going to back it up just a little bit because she jumps right in. She didn't take much of a break there. All right.
And waiting to devour everything that comes out of her. Maybe it's not a dragon for you. Maybe it's fear. Maybe it's insecurity. The idea that I may fail. The idea that the moment I release it, it may never become what I thought it could be. And so I'm having to bear another woman's curse with fear looking at me.
Okay. This is where you're going to get off tracks very, very quickly. This is a common tactic in teaching that is absolutely incorrect. It is. Did you notice that what she's done, she's taken this. Yes, it's apocalyptic literature, but it's not a piece of the scriptures that can mean whatever you want it to mean. That's not what it is. It means what it means. And yet she's taken it so that the women who were there, or if you're a woman who listens to this, well, you're the woman giving birth. You're the woman who's clothed with the sun, the moon under your feet, and your head is garlanded with 12 stars. You're the woman who's pregnant. That's what it is. And what are you pregnant with? Well, did you catch it?
The idea that the moment I release it, it may never become recognizes that there is a dragon waiting to devour everything.
Okay, there's the thing. The dragon. Sorry, we'll get to that. She'll talk about what you're birthing. The dragon. The dragon is, it may not be a dragon. She allegorizes it. The dragon's whatever you want it to be. The dragon's whatever is in front of you that's trying to stop you from giving birth. And by birth, she doesn't mean birth either. Birth doesn't mean birth. The dragon doesn't mean dragon. The woman doesn't mean woman. And the wilderness doesn't mean wilderness. And the child doesn't mean the child. It can mean whatever you want. But listen to the dragon.
That comes out of her. Maybe it's not a dragon for you. Maybe it's fear. Maybe it's insecurity. The idea that I may fail. The idea that the moment I release it, it may never become what I thought it could be.
So maybe it's fear. Maybe it's doubt. Maybe it's anxiety. Maybe it's worry. What on earth are you talking about? This is not about giving birth. It's not about birthing your dreams. This is about Jesus. That's what it is. But then look where she goes after this.
And so I'm having to bear another woman's curse with fear looking at me.
Bearing another woman's... Now, here's the thing. Since I don't have the whole thing, I can't tell you everything that was being said. But I would have to ask, as soon as I hear that, I think it's this idea that people have of generational curses. And to understand generational curses, they take it to mean as if somebody way back in your history has done something, they were involved in the occult, or they played with tarot cards, they did this or they did that, then a demon has attached itself to your family line and is attached to you. That's your generational curse that you've got to break. That's not the idea of generational curses. The idea of generational curses is the idea of sins of the father. When the father has done something, if the father, you can see this, the father falls into alcoholism. If the parents are in alcoholism, then a good chance the son's going to fall into alcoholism. Until along comes one who says, no more. Ezekiel talks about this. And the idea that it can be broken, that the sins of the father don't have to go on. If the son repents. The son repents and it's gone. He says, no, I don't agree with this. I deny this. But let's go on.
And sometimes it's easier to never get pregnant at all than to have to get pregnant with someone else's pain and your purpose with fear watching on the outside. But when you get in birthing position.
Okay. See, she's allegorized being pregnant. She allegorized being pregnant. It's easier not to, sometimes it's easier not to get pregnant at all. What she's actually referring to is not the act of intimacy. She's not the act of engaging in intimacy, which leads to pregnancy, which is a blessing within the confines of marriage. She's talking about you birth an idea. You birth a dream. You manifest a dream within yourself. You give it to yourself. Yeah, that's what it is. This is ridiculous.
And when you decide that at the end of the day, I got to crush this thing. I have to crush the head of the enemy.
I've got to crush the head of the enemy? If she's referring to the dragon, the crushing of the enemy, we don't do the crushing. Jesus does. Go back and read Genesis 3:15. He's like, I'll put enmity between you and the serpent, between your seed and his seed. He will strike his heel and he will crush his head, bruise his head. It's not us who crushes the enemy. It is God. That's who it is.
Because my mother couldn't do it and I don't want my daughter to fight it. Because my grandmother struggled with it and no one else, not another molestation, not another rape, not another abortion, not another broken heart, not another divorce. I had to go.
So those are all the dragons. Those are all the curses. Because your parents did something, that it's on you. That's what you're going to realize is this isn't teaching the scriptures. This is emotionalism. This is emotional manipulation to get you to respond. And you'll notice if you're watching the video, you're going to see they're going to keep showing these people who are crying, these people who got tears coming down. This is emotionalism.
Go through it so that the people coming behind me don't have to go through it. I'm in birthing position. I'm trying to get ready for some.
If you're going to have a dream, that's the position you got to take. You got to pretend like your feet are up in stirrups. In other words, she's standing though. So that you can get rid of it. Rid of what? I don't even know how this works anymore. This is terrible. I know she's talking to women. And I'm not telling you, you'd say that men don't deal with abortions. Men don't deal with... Look, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the fact that she's all over the place. That's what I'm referring to. This is a complete mangling of it, where she's taken a text that is about Jesus, that is about God, and made it completely and utterly about you. That's what it is. I said the dragon's not the dragon, and the child which represents Christ isn't Christ. It's your dream.
Something to come out of me, and I know everybody's watching, and I know I'm carrying her curse, but
carrying her curse. Look, you can suffer the effects of sin from a previous generation. What I mean by that is if you're born into a family that is abusive, you're born into a family that is continuously broken home. Yes, you've got the effects of that, but you're not carrying the sin itself. You're not. Like, I don't even understand what this is like. Getting in the birthing position. I don't get it. It makes no sense. It sounds good because she's talking with emotion. She's got them riled up. You got to remember, in all these cases, these conferences, they almost always play like music for like half an hour, repetitive music, half an hour to 45 minutes of constant repetitive music that builds up emotion. Let's go.
I gotta push this thing out anyway. I gotta push this thing out until hell gets nervous. I gotta push
this out till hell gets nervous. What are you talking about?
Start the business. I gotta create the book. I gotta let go of this depression.
See, I gotta start the business. I gotta write the book. I gotta let go of this depression. Did you see it? She changed the child. Revelation 12. Take a look. Revelation 12. She bore a male child that was to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. It's about Jesus. But apparently Revelation 12 isn't about Jesus. It's about you starting a business. It's about you writing a book. It's about you getting rid of depression. So apparently now Jesus is a mental disorder. I don't know.
Gotta learn to forgive. But somebody said you can delay my flight, you can cancel it. You can book up every hotel if you want to, but I'm gonna push this baby out.
What does that even mean? It's like starting a bit. She's made it about you. This is how not to teach the scriptures. This is how not to do it. When they take something that is evidently about Jesus and they make it about themselves.
My kids can act crazy. My friends can abandon me.
Okay, so now, if you're paying attention, these are all dragons. Your kid's acting crazy, that's a dragon. Your flight being delayed, that's a dragon. What is this?
Come by myself if I have to, because I got to push this baby out. I got to start the business.
See, I got to start the business.
I got to get my heart together.
I got to get my hurts together.
I got to push this baby out.
And remember, she's talking Revelation 12. The woman who's in labor, she cried out in labor and in pain to give birth. And she's ready to give birth. She's ready to give birth. This is what she's regulated Jesus to. And the people are laughing up. Why? Because they're saying, it's like, you. It's emotionalism.
And the dragon didn't realize that a woman doesn't just push a baby out.
The woman doesn't just push the baby out.
There's always someone there to catch the baby, even if she has to do it with her own hands.
There's always someone there to catch the baby, even if she has to do it with her own hands. Keep in mind, she's referencing again. She's referencing again, trying to reference the scripture. Then the woman fled to the wilderness where she prepared a place. The child was caught up to God. Wait a minute. If she's catching, if this is the imagery, and that you're the woman, and the child is your dream. I'm just putting it together here. And the woman, and you catch your own child, you catch your own dream. Then in that passage, not in this aspect, you're both the woman and you're God. Pack that out. That's what she said. Listen again. Listen again to it and pay attention.
And the dragon didn't realize that a woman doesn't just push a baby out, that there's always someone there to catch the baby.
See, there's always someone there to catch the baby. She's referring to verse 5, and her child was caught.
Even if she has to do it with her own hands.
Even if she has to do it with her own hands. This isn't about the scriptures. Notice this. This is about the power of a woman. That's what it is. Women, you're mighty, you're raw. Hear you roar. And she's obliterated Revelation 12. Obliterated it. I would say she's the dragon.
And I hear God saying that if you push.
Okay, and I hear God saying. That means God's currently talking to her. God is currently talking to her at that moment. God is talking to her. So whatever she says next, that is God's word.
He'll pull. I want to love again, but I don't want to be a fool again. I want to push. But who's going to catch what I push out? Just like God did it for the woman. I'm telling you, if you vow with me for the next 2 days to push.
Okay. Then you vow with me for the next 2 days to push. What is it? This is about your dream. What is this? This isn't about Christ. This is supposed to be a woman's conference. This is supposed to be a Christian conference. And in every aspect, she obliterated Revelation 12, which is about Christ. She's made it about about her, made it about the audience, made it about you. That you're just going to give birth to your dream, and it's going to come out. And don't you worry, because that dream's going to come forth. If you have to do it yourself, you will catch it yourself. And that dragon, which can be anything from fear, anxiety, worry, to your crazy kids, to a flight being delayed or canceled, that's not going to stop it. You're going to have your dreams, because the child is your dreams. No, the woman in this case is Israel with Mary. The dragon is the enemy, and the child is Christ. That's what it's about. It was foretelling what had been, is, and will be. It's got nothing to do. She is playing at being a scriptural teacher. She is playing at being a teacher of the true scriptures. That's what she's doing. And for that, I give to Sarah Jakes Roberts the Apostasy of the Week Award. Congratulations. There you go. All right. That's going to bring us to the end of our episode here this week. As always, I thank you for joining me. If you have any questions, you got anything that you'd like to talk about, you disagree, you're free to write in, disagree with me, go right ahead. That's fine. I'm always for that. There's chances I make mistakes. That's the way it goes. Feel free to comment. If you want to support the work that is done here, I don't ask for money. I never ask for money. I just ask that you share. And you share the segments, share how it is. I don't even care if you want to reuse a segment in something else. Go right ahead. I don't care. It's all free out there. You want to support, just share, share, get it through the algorithms, that kind of thing. But until next time, may you stand firm on the solid foundation of Jesus Christ. May you not play at being a follower, but may you be authentic and honestly seek Jesus in all that you do. May you never be moved from his foundation. Blessings. Until next time.